about spiritual intelligence.
The rest will join us if they will. And,
it is the ability to manifest a high mental capacity, a state of.
Can you all hear me? Could you please confirm, Budia, whether you can hear me? Budia, or any other person, please could you confirm that you can hear me? Loud and clear, right?
Yes.
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 Okay, that's okay then. So as usual, so should I get lost, or if I'm not audible for one reason or the other, please feel free to stop me, because as it is now, I can only see my screen. So I do not know who will be coming in and who will be going out, but probably I can use my phone so that I control also from this end. But just to begin, I wish to take this opportunity first and foremost to welcome you back after that short break. I hope you're all keeping well and observing the COVID-19 protocol. This is one of the ways that we're observing this. That's why the university has to facilitate this through online learning, because that's what the requirement dictates. So this semester, this will be a last semester, guys, and I hope all is well. This semester I'll be handling 2 units, major units, of course 3 units, plus the SMR 400, the research project. SMR 407, which is restoration of coastal and marine ecosystems, and SMR 411, which is the conservation of threatened marine vertebrates. But for today, today's session, we'll be focusing on SMR 407, which is the restoration of coastal and marine ecosystem. So are we together there? As usual, if there are any communications, I prefer them. Of course, we have a platform which I encourage people, if they have challenges or whatever form of communication you want to reach me, you can always use that platform. If you want a private correspondence, I preferably like using the corporate email. So not unless it's a must, you can use my Yahoo, but I prefer whenever we are communicating, we have any correspondence, be it for this unit or any other any other communication, please use the corporate email. So this is where the confusion was. The timetable and the units that I'll be handling. I thought, is this not what you have? The communication you have on the platform, it's a replica of this. Budia?
The one you sent has no time.
It doesn't have time. Then now that I'll be sharing these slides, now you can actually see that SMR 400, maybe it was an oversight. This is what I should have shared, because this one has time and also the time and the days. So as you have the link there, And therefore, for SMR 400, if it is necessary that we meet, of course, there is no point of meeting. I'll be giving a brief probably after we are done with today's session on SMR 47. So we'll leave that to rest because tomorrow I'll not be available. But I can do the briefing today on anything concerning SMR 400. Then for 407, you have the link there again, and it will be every Wednesday from 2 to 5. And then for SMR 411, we shall be meeting every Tuesday from 9 to 12. Of course, these timings are not casted in stone, more so because this is a unique group. Of course, we are not supposed to change the timetable as per the regulations, but considering that this is a group that is unique in the sense that you are not sharing units with other groups, should there be need to change the timing, and we can always do that through consultation. Is there any question as regards the timetable or clarification so that we don't have kuna swali regarding that? Silence means affirmative.
No.
Good. Okay. I'm trying to join through another gadget so that I am able to see what is going on. Because from the laptop, I don't have much. I'm not able to navigate and see if there are people with challenges joining. I can always help them join if need be. But just to begin, as so I can try to multitask. I just want to give a brief course outline of what is expected of this unit. We'll look at a number of items, and the first item that we shall focus on is an overview of what is ecological restoration. What is ecological restoration? The ecological restoration concept in totality, what it entails. Then after that, we shall also look at some of the components and approaches used in ecological restoration. Then item number 4, item number 3, we shall also be looking at the guiding principles that are applied in any ecological restoration exercise that are agreed upon. And therefore, I can say they are standard principles for any restoration exercise. Then after we understand those principles, we shall look at the standards or practice or what it entails, what is in terms of planning and implementation of any ecological restoration projects. Then we shall have an item on disturbance and impairment of the ecosystems. And the reason we have this is because what drives restoration is disturbance and impairment of the ecosystems. We'll not have the restoration exercise in the first place if we didn't have any form of disturbance or impairment. There'll be no reason actually to do the restoration. Then item number 6 will focus on the ecological attributes of a restored ecosystem. We'll be looking at what should how should a restored ecosystem look like, or what can be used to measure whether a particular ecosystem has been restored to the level that is required or not. So we'll be looking at those specific attributes as an item. Then item number 7 will focus on the restoration, monitoring, and adaptive management. These are terminologies that you are, of course, very familiar with. And of course, this will be focusing on after you have done the restoration, you'll have to, it's actually one of the requirements that monitoring should be done after restoration has been completed. And as you monitor, the other thing that goes hand in hand with monitoring is applying adaptive management. And we'll look at this in depth, but of course, because these are terminologies that we have used and you understand what this means, it's always good to have some adaptive management when it comes to ecological restoration. Then we'll have some case studies. These case studies will focus on overview of mangrove ecosystem restoration. We shall also have a quick overview of coral reef restoration and an overview of seagrass ecosystem restoration. And if time allows, we can also look at one of our terrestrial restoration exercise, either forest or not a forest, a mine site that has been impacted. How do you go about restoring such a site? So these items basically will be based on case studies. Where have these been done, and how can this restoration be done in practice for those various key ecosystems? Then the last item will focus on the current global initiatives. So what is the world doing on matters ecological restoration, and what are the targets? There is so much going on in terms of restoring degraded ecosystems globally, and what really drives these initiatives? Are there commitments? Are there targets? We'll be looking at that as an item. So probably I need to ask a question. Looking at that overview of what is expected of this unit, may I now get back from get it from you? What is your expectation of this unit? Is there anything that scanning through those items that I have highlighted, what are the other maybe items, or what was your expectation? Is this the scope of your expectation for this particular unit, or is it too heavy? Is it too light? Can I give you 5 minutes? You think about this? You tell me whether we can make it better, or maybe are we too ambitious, or are we under ambitious? Are you guys still there?
Yes, we are there.
You're there. Najua naweza kuwa najiongelesha hapa na sina habari. So now that you have mentioned you're there, Maureen, From the voice, I can tell that's Maureen. Maureen?
Yes.
So if I may ask you as a person, what was your expectation of this unit in terms of the coverage, the scope?
Okay, according to me, I expected maybe we have a trip to a site that has been restored and see how it looks like.
Okay. What else? Anything else? Is there anything else? Budia?
For me, I think I'm okay.
Budia?
Yes, sir.
There's so much noise from my end there.
No.
Okay. I was asking, what's your opinion as regards the scope? You are.
As for me, since we are talking about restoration and coastal and marine ecosystem, from the course outline, I can see you've addressed everything from the ecosystems. What are these ecosystems? And as well as the case studies that winds up everything. Yeah, that is for me.
All right. Anything else from any other person? Before I react to what.
Sir, we can hear some noise from your end.
Unfortunately, the better part of this semester will be online. But I hope when we come back from because we will be coming back because of the exams, and we'll have that we have a field trip either to a degraded or a restored mangrove ecosystem, or a degraded or restored reef ecosystem, and or a seagrass ecosystem. And more importantly, the places that we've been taking students, the previous group, mostly we take them to South Coast for a mangrove ecosystem. There is a lot of work going on in South Coast, especially in Gazi, where we have the Mikoko Pamoja project. That is one of the projects that is has been focusing on ecosystem restoration. And of course, there are many other ecosystems that have been restored. We have quite some good work on coral reef restoration that has been done in Shimoni. We also have, of course, the terrestrial ecosystem, and a classical example of a restored ecosystem where we have had a chance to take students is also the Bamburi mine site. That's one area that also is a good site to also visit with students, because it's a classical example of where degradation has taken place through mining, and there has been restoration going on. And the same case applies also to a site in Tiomins. They are a bit strict, but we have not had a chance to take students there. But of course, we cannot go to all these sites. We have to choose one. And therefore, I'm aware that if need be, or not really need be, of course, there is need. But we'll pursue with the admin that immediately you guys arrive, we should be able to do a visit to one of these sites for this unit, for the benefit of this particular unit. So if that is in agreement, of course, you can always mention this unit. It's not casted in stone. We can always, I like a dynamic unit where we can always change things here and there so that it suits. Now that you are dealing with more mature students, you have interacted with these ecosystems, and therefore, obviously, you know what are the limitations. And that's why sometimes you're also asked to do an assessment of this course in general so that we see where the areas that require improvements. And that's why I was posing that question, whether the scope of what we have shared is what you were expecting. Is it overrated or is it underrated? Hopefully, you're not keeping anything to yourself. So on course assessment, it's the same approach that I always use, but as you know, this usually applies when we have a face-to-face engagement. But we'll have our first cut, which will be online. I will decide whether it's possible to do an online open book cut. You know what an open book cut is? Where you can use the materials that you have, but you complete that exam within the stipulated time and make sure that you submit it within the stipulated 1 hour. Alternatively, we can have a sort of an assignment cut, but it will be around, the most important thing is that it will be online and it needs to be submitted by 7th of July. So cut 2 will also be an assignment, and that again needs to be submitted by, no, I think that's an omission. It cannot be 9th of July. I think it's 9th of August, if I'm not wrong. But I will communicate this before the set date. But at least the first one, I think I'm pretty sure that it has to be 7th of July. As regards the field trip that Carol raised, I said there are 3 options: either a visit to Gazibe, where you be able to see the work of restoration that is going on mangroves, or you go to Shimoni, where you'll be able to see some restoration of the reef ecosystems, and or Halapak, where they are doing mine site restoration. Of course, the exam will be face-to-face, and that will be communicated at the right time. So is there any question as regard course assessment or clarification? Anything? So can we continue? Are you guys still there?
Yes.
Budia, should you lose me? Just flash my phone, yeah?
Okay.
Yeah. So the big question is, what is restoration? Yeah. Is this a new Is this a new terminology? Of course, it's not a new terminology because
Can continue.
yeah. I have highlighted the two terms, structure and function. And also notice that we are talking about bringing back, because it may not be necessarily from its original state. Original state probably would have been worse or even or better, because it could be original millennial in nature or in time, in terms of time. But we want to bring it back to a functioning ecosystem in terms and in terms of function. So what do I mean by structure and function? These are the structure, original structure. We are talking about the complexity of an ecosystem in terms of the species composition and the numbers. In terms of if it's a marine ecosystem like a reef ecosystem, how many species are there in terms of numbers? If they're groupers, for example, we use, for example, species like groupers as an indicator species. How many are they in terms of numbers? So that's why you need monitoring of the ecosystems periodically or regularly so that you determine, for example, numbers. Again, the other thing about structure is the types of species. It's not just the numbers, but how many species are there? Is the ecosystem diverse in terms of species, or is it just particular species that are there? So the more the species, the types of species, the variety of species, the more complex that ecosystem will be. And therefore, the more robust the ecosystem. Then on the other hand, in terms of function, the ecosystem should be able to function properly, both in terms of services and in terms of goods provision. So an ecosystem, therefore, like I have just said, has two attributes that I have highlighted there. That is the structure and function. So these two attributes are usually used to define and illustrate the level of damage that an ecosystem has suffered. And therefore, an original ecosystem, as it were, will have high values of those two attributes. It will have high values of those two attributes. Both the structure value will be very high, and the function value, if it is measured, will also be very high. And therefore, when degradation takes place, these two, what actually happens is that these two attributes, structure and function, will go to almost, and that's how a degraded ecosystem is defined. And therefore, if an area, if an ecosystem is degraded, and that ecosystem is left on its own, the ability that that ecosystem might start regenerating or recreating itself of the degradation is reduced. And therefore, it naturally, the natural processes of primary succession can actually begin if the pressure of degradation is if it is reduced. So when restoration, there are other similar commonly used terms. And the other terms that have been used commonly include rehabilitation, remediation, or reclamation. So my question is there a difference between these terminologies, or can they be used interchangeably, meaning and mean the same thing? Do they mean the same thing? So I wanted you to take some time and look at these other terminologies. When you look at restoration, rehabilitation, remediation, and reclamation, what is the difference between these terminologies? Do they mean the same thing? Guys, are you there? Yep.
Yes, we are there.
So I want you to take 10 minutes. We come back at 3:12, and you select 4 people to define those 4 terminologies, trying to differentiate them, so that we know do they mean the same thing? Okay. Are we together?
Yes.
Yes. I'm actually going to stop presenting so that you just take a few minutes and discuss among yourselves, so that we know you tell me whether we can drop the other 3 and look and agree which terminology should use, or should we use all of them but referring to different things. Is that a assignment or a short discussion clear?
Yes,
Yes.
but are there no breakout rooms? Or
Yeah? Sorry?
the breakout rooms?
I don't have. I think I should have set it up. I should have set it up, but now I'll take so much time to start looking at how I should. You can actually see yourself online, eh? So if you decide, I want you to break. You are almost you're approximately 20 people. So if you can break in 5-5, I'll do it next time. I don't know how. I've never used breakout rooms in the Google Meet, but I'll find out. I'll find out. That's a good suggestion. But I want each group to define those terms. Alternatively, you discuss it among all of you, but there has to be one person explaining what each term means. Actually, not 3, because you have already explained what restoration is. I want you to tell me whether that is different from rehabilitation or reclamation, and therefore I need a definition for the other 3. Go. Okay. Bodhia, can you still see my screen?
Yes.
And now?
No.
I'm giving you up to grade 12. Then I'll be back.
Maureen, take it over.
Budhia.
Take it over, madam.
Sites 312. It's past 312. Our MBs are going.
All right. It's unfortunate. I didn't know there was such a feature. That would have worked much better. Are you guys there?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Let me get back. So, did you get a chance to talk among yourself? I don't know how you did it, because ideally I should have broken you into groups, but I didn't know that there is such a feature on Google Meet. I know it works with the Zoom, but I didn't know there is such a feature. I should be able to do that next time. But all the same, Nyamoita,
Yes, sir.
were you able to discuss among yourselves?
No, because we could not. Okay, we were not into groups, so it was a challenge in discussing. So I don't think if we discussed, but everybody did it on its own.
Everyone did it on their own. So,
Yes.
what's your take on the use of those other terminologies?
According to me, I think the terminologies can be used replacing each other. In short, they are synonyms.
So, in your opinion, restoration and rehabilitation is one and the same thing?
Yes, restoration, rehabilitation, and remediation. Though the last one may be seemingly to be a bit different, but can also be used.
So, there's no difference between restoration and rehabilitation?
No, there's no difference, but with reclamation, it seems a bit different.
So, what is the difference? What is what makes it different from the rest?
Reclamation, with reclamation, I don't think the ecosystem will have been degraded. Instead, it's what was a waste, which is reclaimed to be useful.
It's what is considered, and what it's they're reclaiming to be a waste. Is that what you're? Can you give us an example of anything wasteful that can be reclaimed to something useful?
An example, for example, reclaiming land from the sea. So you reclaim land from the sea and make it maybe land for
like they do in, for example, maybe in Holland or in Netherlands.
Yes, that one.
But does it mean that the Yeah. Do you have any other person with a different? Budhia.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a difference? Are the three terms? Can the three terms be used interchangeably?
Yeah, for me, I find they can be used interchangeably. And as Maureen has said, reclamation, though I took it from an ownership point of view, I think kuna tatizo kidogo.
Owino, Clifford, any take on this?
Nothing much, sir.
Edwin Musetti?
Yes, sir.
So all the three terms, according to you, in your layman's explanation, do they all the same?
I think they are just the same. They can be used interchangeably.
You think so?
Yes.
So is, for example, when you look at what is, for example, what Bamburi Semen is doing in the mine sites, is that restoration? Is that reclamation? Is that rehabilitation? Or it's all the same?
It's a
Have you had a chance or a privilege to be at Bamburi? Nature
Yes.
or no, Halapak?
Yes.
What have you noticed? What do they do there? Or what do they use to rehabilitate the mine quarries? If you go to Halapak, you'll notice that they mainly use one particular species, which is there is so much use of the pine, is it?
Yes.
Why do they use them? Why do they use the pine? And would you? And if they use the pine, and the way I have defined restoration is trying to return a degraded ecosystem to its original state. But when you look at what Bamburi Semen is doing, they just let me use the right term. They rehabilitate that those mine sites, but they don't return those ecosystems to the original state, because when you look at, for example, the diversity of species, the species that they commonly use or they mainly use is the pine, is it? And there is a reasoning behind why they use the pine. It's because it's able to do well in a degraded ecosystem. So that does not qualify as restoration, because restoration, according to the definition, is returning to the original state, meaning the function and the structure that was there before the degradation or before the mining started ought to have been returned to that. And therefore, restoration is not rehabilitation. Right? Are you in agreement? Right?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
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 So that is not that's not restoration, that is rehabilitation.
Yes.
So basically what I want to say is that all these four terminologies, they are commonly used together, but they actually mean different things. So, for example, when you look at rehabilitation, like I've explained with the case of Bamburi Cement mining site. So, rehabilitation is the action of restoring a thing to a previous condition or status. So that means so much like restoration. But one thing that is gives it a distinction from the restoration is that there is little or no implication of perfection in terms of structure and function. So they're just returning it to a better state rather than just leaving that site as a quarry. They just return it to that state, to a better state, but it's not a perfect state. But it is at least better than leaving it there. So that is what rehabilitation is all about. And therefore, it's actually very different from restoration. So a rehabilitated ecosystem is not expected to be in original or healthy state as if it had been restored. And that's, now you can actually see the distinction between a rehabilitated and a restored state. And that's why even in life, sometimes when you abuse drugs, you are taken to a rehabilitation center, right? But rarely do you actually get back to your normal faculties properly. And if your normal faculties, it will take time. And that's even when there is need for rehabilitation, there is always a possibility that you might relapse. And once you relapse, you'll go back to the state of degraded state. But if you continue to be supported, you can actually get back to the same faculties that you had before you engaged in drug abuse. And that applies also to ecosystem, to natural ecosystems. On the other hand, when you talk of remediation, even as the name suggests, you are trying to remedy. So remediation may sound so much like it's also the same as restoring, but to remedy is to rectify or to make good. So the process, so remediation involves the process of removal or reduction or neutralization, for example, of contaminants from a site to prevent or minimize the adverse effect that that impact may have on the environment. And therefore that differentiates it from restoration. And a classical example here may include oil spills in a mangrove ecosystem. So the idea here is actually not to restore the mangrove by planting new mangroves, but first of all, making that site ideal for possible restoration, either natural through natural process or a mediated or assisted restoration. So the first action that you take to reduce that impact is what we refer as the remediation. So you read a site, if a site get degraded because there was an oil spill, if you are to restore that site, you cannot restore it in that state. You will have first to remediate. You will first have to rectify that site. You will have to make it ideal for possible restoration. Otherwise, you will be restoring, but it will be an activity in futility. You plant, but nothing grows. And therefore, you need to rectify the factors that are not right for restoration to take off. So here, the emphasis is therefore on the process rather than the endpoint. So you first rectify so that the endpoint will be a site that is ready to begin getting restored, either through assisted means or by naturally through natural process. On the other hand, when you look at reclamation, Maureen was defining this as turning a wasteland into a useful ecosystem. For example, we have seen various, like I was mentioning, Netherlands have reclaimed better part of their land from the sea. But it doesn't mean that that land was wasteful. It was still useful. It was a useful ecosystem. But they're just changing the use from one use to another use. Or even when we have terrestrial ecosystem like wetlands being drained so that they can convert that land to agricultural piece of land that they can use to grow crops. That does not qualify that area as a wasteland. That land was equally useful as it was. As a wetland, it had a function. It has a function, a very important function, and therefore we do not even encourage reclamation in ecology. So reclamation is the process of returning land to its former or any other productive use. And I say any other productive use. Either you want to reclaim so that you have bigger land. You have had the Netherlands, people saying that God created the world. And Hollanders created what? Netherlands. So they have reclaimed from the sea what was not useful according to their definition. So in this case, reclamation has no implication of returning it to its original state, but to a useful state. So when you look at this figure, these are options that are usually used for improvement of a degraded ecosystem to a useful ecosystem. And I say that in any ecosystem, there are two major attributes. That is the structure and the function. So when you look at the x-axis, we have the ecosystem structure. And this ecosystem structure could be in form of the number of species in that ecosystem, individual species, and could also be in terms of the species that are there. Then there is also another aspect of how complex is that ecosystem in terms of how healthy is it in terms of, for example, if you're talking about the forest structure. What is the height of that ecosystem, of the average trees? Or what is the diameter of the most trees in that ecosystem? So that is what constitutes ecosystem structure. Then the other attribute is the ecosystem function. So this applies to what goods and services can that ecosystem provide. So when you look at this figure, you'll notice that we have a degraded ecosystem. And this degraded ecosystem is very low in terms of ecosystem structure, and it's also very low in terms of the services, in terms of the ecosystem function that is providing to the man, to the ecosystem. And therefore, the idea behind restoration is to try and drive that degraded ecosystem back to the original state. And the original state, you will notice that that ecosystem will have very high level or magnitude of ecosystem structure and very high level of ecosystem function. But in the process of doing this, more often than not, it's not possible to return a degraded ecosystem back to its former state. And therefore, the best that you can do, actually, you'll notice that you can only probably try and rehabilitate that ecosystem, but it is practically often impossible to return it back to the original state. Alternatively, you can actually replace or rehabilitate it to be something different. And if you replace it with a different ecosystem, for example, like they have done at Bamburi, it may have very high ecosystem function, but you may not be able to return that ecosystem to have the same ecosystem structure in terms of complexity like it was originally. But it is better than allowing that ecosystem to remain in a degraded state. So in the event that you just leave a degraded ecosystem as it is, there are several possibilities that might happen. That ecosystem might degrade completely, get even worse than it is, or it might stagnate in that state, or even get worse. So when you look at this figure again, it's more or less the same figure, but the trajectory that is expected is the one that is in dashed arrow, that in the process, there are several possibilities that might happen in case an ecosystem is degraded. If you neglect it, it will go back to, it will actually be more degraded at the end of the day or over time. Or if you neglect it, but you reduce pressure, there is a possibility that it might start following that trajectory back to the original state. But if you continue giving pressure to that ecosystem, it might get even worse than it is. Alternatively, there is a possibility that the best you can actually do is just to replace the degraded ecosystem with a better ecosystem. And that's what we are calling reclamation, for example, or rehabilitation. But in the process of rehabilitating, there is high possibility that that ecosystem may go back to the original state, but that will again be a function of time and also intervention. There has to be some intervention, either passive or active intervention. By active intervention, I mean it requires to be assisted to get rehabilitated. Or you can also have a passive assistance, which is reducing the pressure on that ecosystem. So if the ecosystem was getting degraded because there is overfishing, for example, you don't need to reintroduce species or fish in that ecosystem. You only need to reduce the pressure of fishing. And how do you reduce pressure? You as a manager can decide that while we were using, we were allowing probably, for example, if it is a marine park, we were allowing traditional methods of fishing in a protected area, in a reserve. You can take a decision. You can actually make a decision that you're going to close that. You're going to close that marine park for, let's say, 3 months to allow it to rehabilitate itself naturally without actually doing anything else. And that's what we are calling a passive approach when it comes to rehabilitation. So when you look at all those, you will actually notice that these terminologies are very different. They are not the same for, they're actually very different from each other, but often they're used interchangeably and they can actually confuse. But when you look at it from this perspective, you'll notice that it's actually very possible to explain them differently. Is there any question as regards the differences between those terminologies? Hey guys, are you still there?
Yes, we are there.
Muko, eh?
Yes.
Tuko.
All right. So again, when you look at a degraded ecosystem, again, it depends on the type of ecosystem that is degraded. Some ecosystems like I said, it's not easy, it's not practically possible to return a degraded ecosystem back to its original state. But again, that depends on the type of ecosystem. For example, when you compare an aquatic ecosystem vis-a-vis a forest ecosystem, an aquatic ecosystem is likely to regain its original state much faster as compared to a forest ecosystem, owing to a simple reason that the aquatic ecosystem is usually small in nature, and there is high mobility of species, and therefore it's easier for that ecosystem to regain its original state much faster as compared, for example, to a forest ecosystem, because a forest ecosystem requires a very long period. For example, if you cut a tree that has taken, for example, 500 years or even 100 years to grow, for it to go back to that state, and you have chopped all the trees, it will take equally the same amount of time for it to get back to that state, to that original state. And therefore, I say that true restoration is ideally very unrealistic, and especially for some ecosystems. And therefore, rehabilitation or replacement in that ecosystem may be the best option, because as you do rehabilitation, as you do replacement of that ecosystem, you can actually give it the ideals for it to get back to the original state, no matter how long it's gonna take in terms of time. So then the other terminology that is also commonly used is ecological resilience. So when you say that you are resilient, even as the term suggests in English, when you say that someone or something is resilient, it means that it can take so much pressure without changing, right? So for example, if you have two people, I don't know who in class, we have Joseph Nyamo. Is Joseph Nyamo there? Yeah? Is Joseph Nyamo with us? Is Mbudia with us?
Yes.
So what do you understand? What do you understand by resilience?
I refer to it as the ability to bounce back, maybe from setbacks and such.
Yeah, that's very correct. So when we say that an ecosystem is resilient, especially when you look at it from the perspective of those attributes, we have the two attributes in terms of function and in terms of structure. So an ecosystem that is resilient will require to have very high attributes of the two, high level of those two attributes. So if an ecosystem has lower attribute of one of those or both of them, then such an ecosystem will be less resilient. So an ecosystem that has a high number of species, for example, will be more resilient because there is high interconnectivity of species and the ecosystem with other ecosystems. And therefore, such an ecosystem will be considered to be very resilient in nature. And therefore, as you have put it rightly, resilience refers to the ability of an ecosystem to return to its original state after it has been disturbed. So, or rather, how fast the variables in an ecosystem return to equilibrium after disturbance. So, and therefore, an ecological resilience is the amount of disturbance that an ecosystem can absorb before it is changed to another state. And that's why I was looking for Nyamu, because Nyamu looks like he's one of the strongest men we have in class. So when you compare Nyamu with probably one of our girls in the class, if they were to be subjected to some pressure, maybe a kick or a slap, one of them will actually fall down and maybe not be able to stand, right? But maybe Nyamu will be able to resist that, and that's what we are referring as resistance from that disturbance. He will be more resistant to disturbance as compared to a person who has less weight, if you were to use weight as one of the attributes. So resilience is the ability of an ecosystem to recover from disturbance. So ideally, an ecosystem shows resistance by reacting little to increase in pressure. So if you subject an ecosystem to some pressure, for example, overfishing or logging or whatever pressure you subject an ecosystem to. So the structure and complexity of the food web on that ecosystem, which we refer as the connectance or connectivity of that ecosystem, will be compromised, or rather, if the connectance is very high, then such an ecosystem will have very high resilience or ecological resilience. And therefore, in short, I want to say that highly connected ecosystems are more resilient, or if you will, they are more robust to species loss than less connected ecosystem. And therefore, if we have mangrove ecosystem, and we looked at, when you look at the connectivity of ecosystems such as mangrove, seagrass, and the reef ecosystem, systems that are interconnected in that nature are more robust. They are more resilient than an ecosystem that is not connected to some of these ecosystems. So that if there is, for example, pressure emanating, let's say, from stormwater with high sedimentation, if that ecosystem is connected to mangroves, then that ecosystem in totality will be more robust, will be more resilient as compared to an ecosystem that is not connected to other ecosystems, such as, for example, if such an ecosystem was subjected to the same impact or to the same pressure of sedimentation, the chances are that seagrass ecosystem will die very fast, as well as the reef ecosystem, if it was not connected to the mangrove ecosystem, because the mangrove ecosystem will act as the first defense in reducing the level of sedimentation, and therefore that will have less impact on seagrass as well as the reef ecosystem. And therefore, what we have here is a conceptual model of an ecosystem vis-a-vis the pressure. So we have two types of resilience. We have what we call complete resilience and incomplete resilience. So complete resilience is a situation where an ecosystem can go back to its original state after disturbance. While incomplete resilience is where an ecosystem is subjected to some pressure, but it can resist. It can resist that pressure, but it may not go back. It may not have the ability to go back to the original state. So such an ecosystem is considered to have less pressure. So often, systems that have complete resilience also have the ability to resist change over long period and over extended pressure. For example, high level of sedimentation or pollution. It can resist that over long period. So complete resilience, therefore, refers to returning to the original state after disturbance, while partial resilience, or if you will, incomplete resilience, is resilience or is a returning of an ecosystem to slightly lower level of its original state. So in this model, you can see the area, the area marked in A is what we are referring as complete an ecosystem that depicts a complete resilience, while B shows an ecosystem that has partial resilience. And all this is related to structure and complexity of an ecosystem, as well as the structure and composition, structure and function. Is there any question after there? Yep. So the other question I wanted to ask you, why do we bother with ecosystem restoration? Why do people, why do we get attracted? Or rather, have we in life participated in any restoration exercise? Have you guys participated in any restoration? Clifford.
Not really, but I can tell a single reason why we restore ecosystem.
You have never participated in any restoration? You've never planted a tree?
I have planted. That is back at home.
Back at home?
Yeah.
So you still participated in restoration, didn't you?
But
Or that was not restoration? Where were you planting trees?
in Kisumu.
I mean, where? In what kind of an ecosystem?
It's just a general ecosystem.
Yeah?
Around home.
Around your compound?
Yeah.
So why were you doing that? Maybe that's we should begin there. Why did you plant those trees around your compound?
I had a target that I will use them for building from 3 years to come.
So the reason was actually economic.
Economic reason. And then in addition to that, the beauty of the environment.
You wanted to make your compound looks beautiful.
Yeah, look nice, attract people.
Yeah.
And then some fresh air.
All right, those are good reasons actually to participate in restoration. Meaning, most of us have actually engaged in restoration of some sort, right? The reasons for doing this are very diverse. Like Clifford's put it, he purposely was doing this so that in a few years' time, he will be able to harvest timber and probably put up his timber. And maybe the other reason is to make the place looks beautiful. Because when you have a green around your compound, the place looks, of course, beautiful. But the other question is, are there other reasons why we do restoration?
To continue obtaining the ecosystem services like cycling, nutrient cycling, the cleaning of the air, as well as water retention.
Yeah, so meaning there you can actually combine that and maybe call them, they could be what? It could be ecosystem services, restoration of ecosystem services, or ecological services, right? So those are the reasons, right? Is there any other reason why we do restoration? Yeah.
Yes.
Have you guys, have any of you participated in mangrove restoration or terrestrial forest restoration, tree planting, or any other form of restoration?
Yes.
So what have you participated in? Is that Mbudi saying yes?
Yes.
Yes.
So what was it that you were doing?
We were planting mangroves in Mikindani.
Mikindani.
Yes.
So what really motivated you to actually even engage in that?
To be frank, I was invited, but it's still an area since I'm doing a nature-related course. Yes.
And maybe they told you you might get paid 200 bob for participating, or you'll get a free T-shirt, or you'll get some water. Is that also a motivation?
Oh, looking at it, they were doing it to help the communities, since they were the community does beekeeping, and so they are doing it to help the communities as well as the obvious, like protection from hazards and all that.
So basically, I don't know whether there are other reasons, but in the recent past, ecological restoration has become one of the buzzwords, a feel-good word. It's something that majority wants to be associated with. You have even seen currently, I think you can see a lot of institutions engaging in restoration exercises. Haven't you seen that as part of corporate social responsibility? Maybe you have seen KPA doing that. You have seen other institutions like even banks participating in tree planting exercises. True. Or some institution even offering money, like you have seen, you have in the recent past, as Equity Bank was celebrating, was it that, how many years? I think that year since, or 30 or 25 years since they began the operation, and they have dedicated 25 million Kenya shillings to be used for tree planting exercise to restore degraded sites or to be used in tree planting, right? So you can actually see that it's not just institutions that are relevant to environment that are participating in this exercise, but there are so many people and so many institutions that are doing ecological restoration. But there are a variety of reasons why you engage in ecological restoration. So I don't want to subject you to this because I wish I could have done this through the breakout rooms. But I just wanted us to reflect on, that's why I'm posing these questions. Why do we engage in ecological restoration? And a few of you have actually shared some of the reasons why they have participated in these exercises. And the reasons are diverse. The same case applies to even those institutions I was just mentioning: Equity Bank, Safaricom, Kenya Ports Authority, KFS, KWS. They all have different reasons why they are doing this, right? And all those reasons are valid. They all have a place when it comes to ecological restoration. They have diverse. Sometimes even when you restore, sometimes it just feels good to have participated. For example, if I ask Mbodia, you must have felt like a hero for having been involved in such an exercise, and you participated, you've made yourself dirty, but in the evening when you are reflecting, you can count that I've done so many trees. And maybe it could be a target for you. You individually as students, you may say that for the period that I'll have stayed at the course for those 2 years during my bachelor studies, maybe you could have set a target that I should have planted 100 trees or 200 trees or whatever number the target you may wish to give yourself. And the reasons for doing that, they could be so diverse. Some of them will just be, you just want to feel good that you contributed to the betterment of the environment. So as we think about those reasons, you have heard of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration begins this year, 2021, all the way to 2030, because 2030, that's when we ought to have achieved most of the SDGs. And that's why they have actually dedicated this UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. We only have 1 decade for us to have achieved the set out targets. And this also applies to other commitments. When you look at the CBD commitment, did we achieve what we were planning to achieve? Because the targets were supposed to have been achieved by the year 2020. Did we achieve that? If we did not achieve, they are dedicating this decade so that you can restore all the degraded sites. For example, one of the targets of the CBD, Convention on Biodiversity, Biological Diversity, was to halve the areas that are degraded. By halving the area that are degraded, I mean, if you had 1,000 hectares in Kenya that are degraded in terms of mangroves, the target as a party and a signatory to CBD was to ensure that at least 500 hectares have been restored. And if it has not been restored, this is the time to actually actualize that between 2021 and 2020. So the aim of this decade is to prevent and halt, or rather reverse the degradation of the ecosystem on every continent, particularly for countries that are a party to the Paris Agreement and the CBD and many other conventions that we have committed to in promoting restoration of degraded ecosystem. So the target for ecosystem restoration as per the UN decade on ecosystem restoration is to ensure that for every dollar spent in restoring the ecosystem, there has to be good returns. That should be in the range of $3. For every dollar we spend, the return should be between $3 to $75 in terms of the economic benefits in form of ecosystem goods and services by the year 2030. So even as we celebrate the UN decade on ecosystem services, we actually supposed also to be celebrating the World Environment Day. So the World Environment Day is actually on 5th of June, which will be on, is it on Saturday or Sunday? Saturday, right? So, and this is a day that is usually commemorated every year. Every 5th of June, we celebrate or we commemorate the World Environment Day. But the theme for this year has been synchronized with the UN decade on ecosystem restoration. And therefore, the theme will be on ecosystem restoration. And therefore, this is usually done by celebrated through the focal institution, which is NEMA, and they actually choose where to celebrate such a day. And therefore, this year, they'll be doing this in Garissa University grounds. That's where the national event will take place. But that does not mean that the only place that will get rehabilitated or restored is Garissa. So in small ways, this can also be done, even at KU level or any other institution. I've seen some of the former students from your group. They have already sent some flyers that they'll also be doing some restoration, I think, at Tudor. Is it Tudor Creek or something like that? Have some of you seen these flyers?
Yes.
So I will encourage those who can partake in this, or wherever you are. I don't know where most of you are. For those who are not in Mombasa, you can still participate in a small way in commemoration of this important day. So the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration will be launched officially on 5th, so that it is synchronized together with the World Environment Day. Although UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration has already begun, but they will be, of course, be launching it officially so that it coincides with the World Environment Day. So the reason we do restoration, as some of you have already mentioned, is to improve the ecosystem services, be it cycling, be it the catches that we get from those ecosystems. The other reason could be just to promote environmental education. The reason we have such an environment day is to sensitize the masses and the public about the importance of the environment. So they participate in the restoration, and in the process, they also sensitize and create awareness about the importance of having a healthy ecosystem. The other reason could be recreation opportunities. You want to make a place look much better, more beautiful, and that in itself is good enough. As Owino was putting it, you want to have a shade, you want to have a good umbrella tree around the compound. That's in itself is good enough. Or even enhance the aesthetic of the natural area. The place will just look beautiful. When you look at, for example, for the purposes of recreational purposes, the reason they do this, when you look at the Halapak, for example, they have actually rehabilitated degraded mine sites, and they have converted such sites again to ecotourism for recreational purposes. And therefore, it's actually possible to make money out of those activities. Some of the other reasons that have been highlighted include recovering sacred sites such as the Kaya forests. You rehabilitate because you have a high regard for this kind of sites that are considered to be sacred. And of course, lastly but not least, is also to help redeem the interconnectedness of ecosystems. So when you restore one degraded ecosystem, you're actually enhancing and making the ecosystem, the interconnected ecosystem, more robust or more resilient. And therefore, those reasons are not exhaustive of the reasons why we do restoration. But some of the values that make us restore are fulfilled directly by the performance of ecological restoration. For example, during the World Environment Day, there will be speeches, and some of the things that will be fulfilled is the environmental education awareness. So that is one of the reasons why we restore. And that is actually achieved on the material day. However, some of the other reasons could be long-term reasons. So most values are satisfied much later by a system after they have been restored. You don't expect that ecosystem services will be felt immediately after you have just restored. It takes time for ecosystem to start functioning again like it was functioning before it got degraded. And therefore, when you look at all these reasons that I have highlighted, they can actually be categorized as personal values, ecological values, or cultural values, or socioeconomic values. Similarly, when you look at this quadrant, that it's a model that was actually presented by a scientist called Ken Wilber in 2001. So from this quadrant, he divided the reasons as to why we do restoration into 4 equal quadrants. So as viewed from the left, moving to the right. Just a second. Sorry for that. So as I just want to explain this quadrant, and maybe we'll stop it at that after this. So as viewed from right to from left to the right, the model consists of 2 hemispheres. So one is pertaining to the subjective values, and the other is concerns the objective values. So the reason we actually restore, some of the reasons are very subjective, they're just emotional reasons. We just want to feel good that you have participated in an exercise that was engaging probably a local community. Or some of the reasons could also be very objective. You want to restore the ecosystem values, or you want to improve the socioeconomic livelihood of the local community because the fishery catches have gone down and you want to improve it. So the objective values can be measured and analyzed. Whereas when you talk of subjective values, you're only expressing the opinions or emotional responses as to why you'd want to restore a degraded ecosystem. Again, when you look at it from top, you have the individual reasons and you also have the collective reasons. So as viewed from top to bottom, the model consists of a hemisphere that is relevant to individuals. The reasons you want to restore could be, a degraded ecosystem could be very personal, or it could also be very collective if it is touching on socioeconomic values or if it is touching on cultural values. So the upper quadrant represent emotion, reaction to ecological impairment. So the latter may occur that our culture would allow probably the impairment to happen, or impairment may insult our aesthetic sensitivity. So all these responses provide satisfaction of knowing that we did something proactive to resolve a problem that concerns all of us, which is ecological restoration. So when you look at all these 4 hemispheres, and the reason that Clifford gave us, or the reasons that Mbudia was giving us, the reason that Maureen was giving us, they all fall under one of these 4 quadrants. The reason they are restoring could be very, very personal, or it could be ecological reasons, or the reason sometimes we do this is to give a service to improve the socioeconomic reasons. So for example, when you look at the lower quadrant on socioeconomic values, it represents the collective socioeconomic values in regard to ecosystem services that we have curtailed or lost from impairing the ecosystem or degrading the ecosystem. And therefore, by degrading an ecosystem, we place ourselves collectively as a society at a greater risk of, for example, flooding. If we cut all the trees and there is, for example, a tsunami, we cut all the mangroves and a tsunami comes, it will hit the entire society. And therefore will actually be at the risk of flooding, for example, or if we allow degradation to take place in a given ecosystem probably by overfishing, for example. It's the collective responsibility. It's all of us who will suffer. Because in the event, for example, there is fewer catches, all of us will suffer in the sense that there'll be less fish for us all. And therefore, it's only those that will have enough resources, that will have money, that will afford the small catch that will be available. And therefore, it will be very competitive. But when an ecosystem is functioning properly and the fish catches are high, it means that it will affect all of us in a good way because we can all afford to have protein or fish in our table. So, and the same case applies to if we degraded a mangrove ecosystem, for example, we'll all be affected by flooding in the event that maybe there is flooding as a result of tsunami. People who are protected, if we have a healthy mangrove ecosystem, we'll all be protected. If we don't have a healthy mangrove ecosystem, few people will have contributed to the degradation, but when it comes now to the damage, we all have to suffer the effect of that damage. So in other words, we have collectively suffered. It means that we have collectively suffered in our socioeconomic values on account of ecosystem impairment. And therefore, that reduces our standard of living and the well-being of the society at large. And therefore, ecological restoration will allow us to recover these socioeconomic values in terms of increased ecosystem services. And therefore, these services promote a stronger economy. If we have enough catches, that will promote a stronger economy. It will reduce the economic distress to those who are engaged in fishing, and it will also increase the capacity of the social integration. There will be less of too much conflict within the society if the ecosystem is providing for all of us. Are we still together? So I hope you are able to see the connection between all these quadrants as presented here and as I'm explaining it in terms of collective vis-a-vis individual responsibilities or reasons, or subjective vis-a-vis objective reasons as to why we should promote restoration. Are you feeling exhausted? Are you feeling fatigued?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Can we continue, or we rest it fast at that?
We can leave it at that.
Yeah? So if you will, you can look at this model. I think it's accessible if you just type Ken Walber quadrant model on ecological restoration. I think you should be able to access this, and you can actually read better and understand what this model is all about. But this one basically summarizes generally the reasons as to why we participate or we do restoration of any ecosystem, irrespective of whether it's terrestrial or marine. The reasons we do all that, it's because of those four categories of reasons. And again, when you look at those four categories, they can be broken again further. Are the reasons subjective or objective in nature? Or are they collective or they are individual in nature? So probably the last question I may want to ask, who do you think are the best agent of change when it comes to ecological restoration? Can you guys as students, would you consider yourself to be good ambassadors of change on matters ecological restoration? Mm-hmm. Or if I could put it differently, the best agent of change, or rather kids or children, are considered as the best agent of change on matters ecological restoration. So why do you think that is the case? Or rather, if you can also put it differently, if you want to succeed in ecological restoration, there is actually need to engage the young generation. Do you think that is valid?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
So what are some of the reasons to qualify this? Maureen, you're saying a very big yes. What makes a young generation the best agents of change or the best ambassadors on matters ecological restoration?
According to me, this young generation is the ones who will be remaining with that environment. So engaging in generation will help the environment to be restored so that it can cater for them and also for the future generation.
So can you repeat that again?
The young generations are the owners of these ecosystems. So engaging them will enable transfer that knowledge of ecosystem restoration from the current generation to the future generation.
Yeah, because young generation are very easy to influence in positively, either positively or negatively, because the way they look at things, if you want to culture a society, you need to actually focus so much on the young generation, because they will grow. They are not really, there is even a saying, I think an African saying, that if you want to straighten a tree, you need to do it while it is still very young, right? Once it is grown, the perception of people when they are already grown is very conservative. They become very difficult to perceive things in a different way, away from how they have believed in generations or in many years. But once you culture a young person, it becomes part of the culture. And that's why I think I keep giving you examples that the reasons we have Western countries have outsmarted us in terms of, for example, garbage collection. It's because that's how they have been cultured from their young age. But when we start, for example, banning plastic bags, when people are already so cultured into using plastic bags everywhere they go, it becomes very difficult to instill that discipline. But if we could do that among the young people, in the future generation, it will be a norm among the generation that things are supposed to be done in a particular way. And therefore, for us to succeed, especially in ecological restoration, there is need to embark and use institutions, especially learning institutions, beginning with actually the lower level of institutions, where we engage the young kids in tree planting, even if it is just tree planting within their compound, within the schools. And the reason they would want to do that is because they would want to be associated with those trees. If you give each kid a tree to grow, to plant, by the time they are leaving that school, maybe after, let's say, 8 to 10 years, and each kid is supposed to take care of a number of trees, then there is a very high likelihood that you're going to succeed, as compared to where you have institutions engaging in restoration, and there is very high turnover of people who have been engaged in tree planting, for example. That culture will not be so much instilled as compared to when you do it among the young kids. So I want to leave it at that, but as a reading assignment, I'd like you to go check whether you can come across this. But I think at the beginning, when I was sharing the course outline, I did not, I think, highlight the key reading references. Of course, it's not limited to any, but as we move along, I'll make sure that I try to share some of the key reference materials that I feel are relevant. But of course, you are not limited to that. Now that you are mature students and you are known, now you're already doing research, and therefore it's possible you're able to come across or get most of the relevant materials, basing it on the scope of this of this unit. So just to highlight, then we'll leave it there. When it comes to restoration, any degraded ecosystem is restrained by a number of components. So, and therefore the question is, what restrains an ecosystem from bouncing back to the original state? So any degraded ecosystem depends on the level of degradation. So if the level of degradation is very high, then there are various components that will need to be acted upon so that that particular ecosystem can go back to where it was. And usually there are three major elements that needs to be worked on. And we'll look at that next week. So the first one, you need to do what you call remodeling of the physical aspects of the habitat. Number two, you will have to remodel the chemical aspect of the habitat, such as nutrients or toxicity. You'll have, for example, need to remediate an ecosystem before it bounces, before you can actually engage it in the restoration. And of course, the last element that needs to be remodeled is remodeling of the missing species by introducing new the species that have been lost, whether they are animal species or plant species. So let me just leave it at that, so that I just wanted to highlight it that way, so that you reflect on those three elements that you need to focus on when you are thinking about restoring a degraded ecosystem. So a degraded, restoring a degraded ecosystem will depend so much on the level of degradation. And therefore, the level of degradation will dictate which elements should be worked on first. So if the system is not so degraded, probably the only thing you need to do is to replace the missing species by not planting, by probably just reducing the pressure on that ecosystem, and the ecosystem will automatically start regenerating itself naturally. So is there any question up to there? So allow me to take 1 minute or a few minutes just to talk about SMR 400. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, on the timetable, we're supposed to be meeting. We're supposed to be, it has been, or rather, the timetable shows that we should be having some engagement on SMR 400 every Thursday. But that is on a needs basis, because this is a project. You have all presented your proposals, and therefore next week what I will do, I will give you the timelines. So what you're supposed to be engaging on now that you already presented your proposal and seem to be okay with all of them, I want you, for those who have not begun, you start collecting your data and start your write-ups. So what I will need to do, I'd like to give you the timelines for different activities because there are a number of things that you will need to do. One, you will need to collect that data. You will need to synthesize it And synthesizing it is basically understanding that data. Because before you analyze that data, you need to have understood it so that you know what aspects you need to analyze. Then after you have analyzed, you need to describe those results. And therefore, the only additional components or sections that I expect from this work vis-a-vis the proposal is that now you will have to add the results and discussion and recommendation. But the most important thing is that, first of all, participate, find time, and that's the reason I was insisting that you should be in Mombasa if you did not have the privilege of having collected data before you left. So make sure that you are able to collect your data, and the reasons as to why you will notice that I always make sure when I'm facilitating SMR 400 to make sure that you do not have units, a lot of workload on that from Thursday and Friday, so that you can utilize that time. That's why you have the unit on Thursday. And considering that we'll not be meeting, there will be no need to keep meeting. You utilize that time to begin writing and sharing, and also discussing. If you have any challenge on analysis or any question that you need to ask, I will encourage that you keep engaging with me, and more importantly, keep engaging with your respective members. But if there is any further clarification that you need, you can actually get it from me. But I'll give a proper clarification next week if there is need. Is there any question as regards that also? Yes, Matuko. Matuko, I've seen you raising your hand, or you didn't mean
yes,
to.
Sir. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Now I sent my proposal and my concept note yesterday, but I have not yet gotten your feedback.
You just sent it yesterday. You think I'm just there waiting for it. We send it to. Have you shared that? Have you shared that with Maureen, with your mentor?
Yes, I have.
The comments you have what you implemented the comments that she gave.
I have not yet gotten any comments.
You have to pursue her.
Okay.
But I'll look at it if you've ready. I have not seen it. You send it to which email? I keep saying you must send it to my corporate email, and if you do not know my corporate email, you check it on the.
I sent it on your corporate email.
Yesterday.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't. You have to check that email whether it is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because I don't have it. I have opened my email, like it's not there.
Okay, let me check.
Yeah. Any other question, please? If there's no any other question, I can leave it at that. We meet next week.
So I have a question.
Who is that, Diana?
Yes. Okay. I don't know if you had communicated about this, but just for my clarifications, I would love to know, when are we supposed to register for the attachment for SMR 312?
You only register for the attachment after you have done it, ideally. Because usually in an ideal situation, you go for attachment after your third year, right?
Yes.
So after you are done with your third year, you go for attachment. Then when you come for the fourth year, first semester, that's when you register for that unit. But you can actually sort for clarification from the, but of course, you cannot be in session now and also be on attachment, right? You'll only be able to go for attachment after you're done with this semester. So very likely from September, December, I think that's when you'll go for the attachment. Unfortunately, because of the this pandemic, otherwise you ought to have gone before you began your 4th year. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah, so you don't register for it now. Or I do not know, maybe I can seek guidance from our chair so that, but if you register for it now, you'll need marks at the end of the semester, which will be challenging, right? Yeah, so you'll have to wait at least, but you don't need to. You see, ideally, you'll need to have to register for it after you are done with the attachment. But you can actually do the attachment and register for it at the same time, so that immediately after you are done with the attachment, we'll do the assessment and we'll be able to post your marks by December. I think that's the earliest that it can be done.
Okay, asante.
Yeah.
So there are possibility of us graduating on December.
That one I do not know. The only thing I know is that you have an opportunity to go for your attachment between September and December. Whether you'll graduate, that's not for me.
And then a single request.
Sorry?
I had a single request. Can we be having these classes on a single day?
Can we do what?
Be having these classes on a single day. If it's on Tuesday, it be Tuesday, and then we do that. So that we'll be having time from Wednesday.
But you have my class only yesterday and today.
I'm just trying to request you so that you put them on a single day.
But you have another class today. That's why I could have put it. But Caroline keeps changing. So I want to fix mine so that they are fixed on those 2 days. Sawa. Yeah?
So there are only 2 units, so I thought maybe we decide on if Tuesday you do them that single day.
Can we let it remain like that until the semester stabilizes? We'll see whether, because I know Caroline's unit are scheduled Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, right? Not unless she has changed.
We talked with her and she agreed that she will arrange the classes on a single day.
That's her, but I don't know how you'll do it. It's okay for me. I think we can do it. We'll see, but at least next week we stick to the schedule, like the way I've shared it. If need be, let's have that discussion next week on Tuesday.
Okay.
Sawa.
Sawa.
Okay. If there are no any other concern, wish you a good evening. Malingine, Budia? Any other person? Michael? So I've given you a green light. Proceed with your